When I was around 11 or 12, my sister got with a man, and everything was fine back then. I got no problems with him. He was really nice to me and all. As I started growing up, he started to make me feel really uncomfortable. When I was 14, he started liking all my pictures on Instagram, unliking them, and then redoing it a bunch of times, day after day. I got so tired, so I blocked him on Instagram and deleted him on Facebook. Didn't want to make a big deal of it because, it's just liking pictures, but I kind of felt weird about it. He's twice my age and has kids with my sister, but kept liking my posts and unliking them. He did it with one of my friends too. After being blocked on Instagram, he started to wow react on my Facebook pictures. Told my grandma to tell me how I looked so pretty on my profile picture, etc. Unreacted to all my pictures and did the same thing a few days later. I found this weird, but didn't do anything about it. He wasn't harassing me or whatever. But one day, when I was about 17 or 18, I asked my sister to give me a lift to my job. She didn't come, he did. I was feeling weird the entire time I was alone with him. He started to tell me how beautiful I was, how I was becoming such a beautiful woman. He tried to grab my thigh, but my hand was on it, so he just acted as if nothing happened. We arrived to my job about 30 minutes before my shift, so he asked me if I wanted to wait or go inside. Of course, I told him I wanted to go inside since I hadn't ate anything for breakfast, and told him I'll eat something before my shift. He told me something like, "Yeah, you need to fill this tummy," and grabbed it while saying it. I felt like he wanted to touch me the whole ride, but didn't see an opportunity. He waited for it and took a chance when he could. He also grabbed my leg one day. I know he hasn't done anything overly wrong, but he's still liking all my pics, and I don't feel safe when I'm alone with him. There's something weird with him, and I don't know what to do about it. My dad's friend, we'll call him A, and his wife were passing through town, so they stopped at our house to visit. I've always been uncomfortable around A, but it's just getting to the point where I can't stand to be around him. He forced me into multiple hugs during his visit, and they always lasted way too long. He'd also run his hand down my body when he'd pull away and kiss me on the cheek when it was extremely obvious that I was uncomfortable. He sat right beside me on an otherwise empty couch to the point where I was literally squeezed between him and the arm of the couch, and he put his hand on my knee and was rubbing it. He kept making comments about how pretty I was, which aren't inherently creepy, but coupled with his other actions, were just weird. I honestly want to tell my dad how uncomfortable A makes me, but I'm afraid he won't take it well or will tell me I'm overreacting. I personally don't think I'm overreacting, but I just want to get an outside perspective. I was still a child when the story happened. My parents were divorcing, and my father had been violent. As he was not looking for an apartment himself and was very demanding, he was still living with us during the divorce. One night I had the biggest fear of my life. My mother puts us to bed early, my sister and I. I still had trouble sleeping because I could hear my dad yelling insults at my mom for hours and hours. He didn't understand why she wanted to leave him. It was obvious, but narcissistic perverts usually don't recognize their mistakes. They think they are perfect. That night, it must have been almost midnight, and I had just started to doze off when another scream woke me up. This time it was my mother. My sister and I got up running and found my mother crying on the stairs. My father had slapped her so hard that her head banged hard against the wall. She was yelling at him not to touch her. We immediately rushed towards her to surround her and protect her. I was 9 years old, but I understood. After all, I had been afraid of my own father. He always hurt us. I was afraid of him, but I refused to leave my mother with him. We took my mother to her room, while my older sister prevented my father from coming up. He kept saying that she was hysterical and mad. Above all, did not admit that he was the one causing the problems. My mom struggled to calm down, but told us to get dressed quickly. When my father saw us coming down dressed to go out, he started insulting her again by asking her where she was taking us, as if she had to tell him. Afraid that he would decide to hit one of us, she just told him that she was taking us to McDonald's to clear our heads. She took her coat and puts us in the car before we drove off. She didn't take us over to the fast food business at all. She drove around town, pulling into a parking lot that I didn't even know. From there, she guided us without the car to the city center, up to a police station. It was too much. She had seen the hate in his eyes. He could have beaten her to death if we hadn't arrived. Just as we had gotten to the door of the police station, we saw my father. He was coming out of the parking lot just in front. He had been looking for us. Unfortunately, he had seen us too. We rushed inside, and seeing our panic, a policewoman took us into an office. As she closed the door, we heard my father enter the building yelling insults, asking where my mother was while calling her names, saying that she had nothing against him, that she had no right, that sort of thing. He screamed like that for almost a whole hour. I was in tears in my mother's arms. My older sister was shaking with fear. My other sister was the only one who could speak and tell the officers who stayed with us everything that had happened. After a while, he finally left. The police station suddenly became silent. Another policewoman poked her head through the door and asked if he had been drinking. But no, he never drank. He was naturally like that. The police explained to us that they had told my father to take his things and leave. They made us stay in their premises for a while to make sure he had gone while taking my mother's statement. My mother, however, still wanted to take us to a fast food restaurant before returning home. My sister absolutely wanted to get her cell phone back, which she hadn't taken due to panic. The police were all very assuring. They just asked us to call them urgently if my father came back. Then we were able to drive home. The house was silent. Everything was off. My father's car was no longer there. Relieved, my mother asked my sister to hurry up and pick up her phone while she waited in the car. She took the keys and ran towards the house, but when she opened the door, she let out a cry of terror. My mother, panicked, opened the car door to get out before seeing my father coming up in a fury towards her. She had just enough time to tuck her legs in before she slammed the door on it. She then had the reflexes to lock the doors, although still worried about my sister. He was starting to scream again and insult her. He pulled the handles and hit the car. It lasted for 10 minutes before sirens interrupted my father. 2 police cars and a van pulled up in front of my house. My sister had ran into her room and called the police on her cell phone. My dad still put the blame on my mom by yelling at her that she dared to call the cops, even though she had been right in front of him this whole time. The police almost jumped out of their vehicles, hands on their clubs. One of them pinned my father against the car and handcuffed him, asking why he was still there, reminding him that they asked him to leave. My dad was no longer being proud, and the only excuse he could find to say was, "But I couldn't find my underpants actually." The police stayed while he finally packed a suitcase. They waited for him to get into his car, which was hidden away, and disappear around the corner before assuring my mother that they would be going on patrol all night. My mom thanked them, and we left our neighborhood to finally go to the promised restaurant. Only, when we arrived in the neighboring street, my father's car, still hidden away, joined us on the road to follow us. What he hadn't foreseen, however, was a police van was following as well. When we arrived at the restaurant, my father finally continued straight on the main road and left town, while the police made 3 turns around McDonald's, raising questions from all the customers. When we got back, we were too afraid that he would be waiting for us again, but as promised, the police came on duty all night. Needless to say, we didn't sleep that night and struggled to sleep for several weeks. I've been an insomniac since then, and today, at 28, I cannot sleep without sleeping pills. Now, this happened almost 20 years ago when I was 15 and still living back home with my grandmother and uncle. To provide some context, my grandparents had built a house together with their son, grandparents living on the ground level, and their son, my uncle, living upstairs. They pretty much built their house with their bare hands and with the help of family members. So for my uncle, that meant working his 9-to-5 job, then driving to the construction site and working there until late at night. They did this for almost 2 years, and I guess due to the stress of working non-stop, plus an ugly divorce he was going through shortly before finishing the house, he first became weird, which I guess turned into some type of psychosis. He stopped going to work because everyone there was watching him. No one was allowed to open windows to let fresh air in because someone could break in. All the doors in the house had to be locked because otherwise, gas would enter the rooms and catch fire. Nonsense stuff like that. At the time when I was 15 years old, I had lived with him for a few years. Grandmother and uncle. Grandfather had died. And even though my uncle never did anything bad, he was still eerie and I was regularly freaked out by him. For example, he had the habit of silently standing in the pitch dark hallway in the middle of the night for God knows how long. Sometimes I would watch TV in the living room late at night, thinking everyone was already asleep. When I got tired, I would switch off the TV and open the door in the hallway and scream in terror because he would be standing directly behind the door in the dark. This happened frequently. He always acted surprised that I got scared because in his mind he was just keeping watch. Something else he did that I absolutely hated. Sometimes when I was sleeping in my room, he would randomly barge in to check if everything was alright. And when I say barge in, I mean that. He would rush in, almost like he was expecting something bad to be happening to me. Now that you've got the idea of his weird behavior, let me explain that one creepy night. I was laying in my bed, sleeping. Ordinary night. I don't know how late it was, but from my feeling, I would say that I slept a couple hours when I was suddenly woken up. I didn't really know what woke me. There hadn't been a noise or anything, but for some reason I woke up instantly terrified with my heart pounding, eyes wide open. My breathing was so fast and loud, so I tried to keep it down to listen. I stayed like that for a couple minutes until I convinced myself that I had just had a nightmare I couldn't recall. But then I heard something outside my bedroom in the hallway. The bedroom door was closed. It was the distinct creaking of one particular step of the stairway, the third one from the top to be exact. So naturally, I thought it was my uncle following his habit of creeping around the house in the middle of the night. But a few seconds after the creaking, I heard super fast steps literally sprinting from the stairs, getting louder and louder until they suddenly came to a halt directly in front of my door. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I just froze and held my breath, half expecting my uncle to barge in at any second. But nothing. No movement. No steps. No breathing. I thought, but it must be my uncle, and he must be standing right outside my door. Somehow, I was also convinced that it hadn't been him. I knew exactly how his footsteps sounded since I heard them often enough. Also, the steps were unnaturally fast with a very sudden halt by my door. If a person ran that fast, it would have been impossible to come to such a sudden halt. They would have crashed into the door. Until this day, I cannot explain what happened that night and what those god-awful steps were. A lucid dream, maybe? I don't know. It still freaks me out. My mom was the youngest of 7 girls. Her oldest sister is 20 years older than her, and all I knew about her was that she had a history of mental health disorders that she did not treat, and that my mom hadn't spoken to her since she was about 10 years old. To be honest, I didn't even know this aunt existed. One day, when my brother and I were about 6 to 7 years old, my parents sat us down. They showed us pictures of our aunt and told us that if she tries to talk to us around the neighborhood, to immediately run to the closest house and call them right away. They said that she was dangerous and to treat her as a stranger. My brother and I were so confused because it was my mom's sister, but okay. Fast forward about a year, and my family is at my cousin's basketball game. This is the daughter of the aunt in the story. My aunt walked out on the family about 10 years before, so there was no reason to think that we would see her. My brother and I begged my mom to let us go get something from the snack stand. So we went over and stood in line. I felt this tap on my shoulder and turned around. It was my aunt. At least it was the woman that was in the pictures. She said, "Hi, little baggie of pot. I'm your aunt." I said, "Hi," because I didn't want to be rude. She said the same thing to my brother, and he didn't respond. She then said, "Well, this line is so long, how about I take you guys out for ice cream?" I didn't know what to say. This was my aunt. I can't be rude. My brother said, "No, we have to go back to our mom now." She said something along the lines of, "Your mom said it's okay. You're my niece and nephew. I would never hurt you." Nope, that was it for me. I said, "Sorry, we have to go." I then felt a tight grip on my wrist and was being dragged with my brother for the door. I didn't yell. I don't know why. I was a kid and had a piercing scream. I just froze. I then heard, "Let him go. Those are my kids. Someone get them." My mom was running full sprint across the court. I had never seen that kind of look in her eyes. People immediately grabbed her and got my brother and I away from her. Apparently, she got charged with attempted kidnapping since my mom decided to press charges. We have restraining orders against her now. I'm 23. Anyway, my cousins took my brother and I to get food, so I don't remember much of the police part, besides telling them what happened. I only learned once I was older that the reason why my parents sat my brother and I down was because at the time, my aunt was blackmailing my parents into paying all of her bills. Phone, rent, medical, etc. She even sent pictures of my house and my brother and I, saying that she would take care of us if the money stopped. Her grabbing us at the basketball game was right when my mom and dad approached her ex-husband about the blackmailing, and he's a lawyer, so they were coming up with some kind of plan. I work as a secretary at my mom's office, and a year ago, I picked up a typical call, but it wasn't typical at all. I said, "Hi, this is, what can I help you with?" "Well, hello, it's your aunt again. Is your mom available?" "No, I'm sorry. Can I take a message?" "Just tell her that I'm a free man now, and I know where she is, and where you all are." Then she hung up. I told my mom. She told me it was okay and that I shouldn't worry. But I still worry she'll find me or show up at any moment. Let's hope I never see my aunt again. I am a 27-year-old female. At the time this occurred, I was a senior in high school, angsty and steadily into partying. For this story, I'm gonna hide her identity solely due to the rules of Reddit. Let's call her Kay. Kay almost cost me my life, and I never want to see her again. A little backstory on Kay. She grew up privileged, given anything she ever wanted. Her parents adopted her 5 cousins, and this is when she started to rebel. Her parents, well off, started to pay less attention to her, so Kay had all the freedom in the world. At the time this incident occurred, Kay was 18, and I had just turned 18. We were headed to a kickback at this guy's house, and nothing more than a little weed was expected. Now I had shared in smoking weed, popping pills here and there. I had just tried ecstasy the summer prior. However, I was planning to stay sober. Kay picked me up, and we stopped to buy cigs at a gas station. I bought a fountain drink, one with a straw and everything. This is crucial for later in the story. We arrived at the apartment, and everyone is smoking, including Kay, but I declined. She would always say shit about how she never wanted to be high alone. Complained about how I never got as high as her. So I obliged, and I cleared the bong off her hit, not even taking a full hit. She asked me for a drink of my soda, and I handed it to her. She had it for a good minute. I had my head turned talking to someone at the kickback. When I looked back at Kay, she was messing with my straw. I didn't think much of it, and she handed it back to me. Within 30 minutes or so, I started to feel intensely high, to the point where I needed to escape from the group. I go out front and smoke a cigarette, only to find that I can't stand up. So I laid on the front porch. Then all of these dark thoughts flashed through my mind. I felt so sick, like my stomach was being torn open. I couldn't stand up. I had to crawl to the bushes to throw up. I thought to myself, all of this off clearing a bong? So I laid on the porch. The apartment was located on a busy street in the city that I live in. I also thought about running into traffic because I felt like I was dying. So I gave myself two options. I could run into traffic and have a car hit me and end this horrible pain I was in. Or I can get some help, maybe flag down someone. My mind wasn't in the right state. I knew nobody in the kickback would take me seriously, and I knew something was terribly wrong. I thought about calling my mom. I must have dialed her number and hung up like 5 different times. Finally, I called and told her what happened and that I didn't know why I was so high. No one else was feeling the way I felt. What seemed like an eternity later, Kay came outside looking for me. As I'm puking out my guts in the bushes, she asked me if I wanted to get some food. I asked her if she was fucking serious. She laughed as I puked. What I didn't know is that my mother called my older brother to pick me up, since he lived close to where I was. He showed up with a machete, ran inside and threatened people. He didn't know who gave me what. It wasn't until I got home that my brother took a look at one of my eyes and noticed how dilated my pupils were. So they rushed me to the ER, after more puking, of course. My memory is a bit fuzzy. I just remember asking my sister-in-law if I was going to die and telling her that I was scared. They ended up sedating me due to the fact that I was yelling and threatening the nurses. Totally out of character for me. They did a tox screen and found MDMA, a drug found in ecstasy, along with other drugs in my system. Now, this is all frightening and everything. However, what I found out a few days later shocked me to my core. Kay had been at a house party the next night. Someone there said that she was passing out free ecstasy to 4 different people. Of those 4 people, 3 had seizures and had to be taken to the ER by ambulance. I'm assuming whatever ecstasy she used was a bad batch. Remember when she asked me to have a drink of my soda? I assume this is when she popped a pill inside and it dissolved. She probably crushed it beforehand or something. I have no clue. But at this time of my life, I hadn't done drugs in quite a while, especially not ecstasy. Kay also went on to tell people that I had slipped her the drug and that she had to go to the hospital. She is a pathological liar and has had to go to therapy for a long time for mental disorders. All of this happened because she wanted me to get high like her. I could have committed suicide because I wasn't in the right frame of mind. It still affects me to this day. It sounds cliche, but I have a hard time trusting people with this experience and among other things. I also don't like sharing drinks with friends. I get scared when I go out to a bar or club, fearing the worst. I mean, if my own friend had done this to me, what's stopping a stranger? So I always guard my drink no matter what. So DK, let's not meet ever again. Forgive me if this is a bit scattered. This is a memory I had tried to block out for a long time. I wasn't more than 9 years old when my grandmother died. My family is, to sum it up, Irish pot-smoking hippies, so it wasn't much of a surprise when there was a keg a few feet down from her jar of ashes at the memorial service. I was basically attached to my 19-year-old cousin's hip. He was always very kind and didn't mind bringing me around with him. I remember that he wanted to rent fishing gear to keep me entertained. After a while, he had to leave, so I was back at the deck area with all the adults, most of whom were very intoxicated at this time. My mom's been sober for a while now, but but she struggled with alcohol abuse, so it wasn't a big shocker for me when she was sloppy drunk at the table. I told her I was going to play with another cousin of mine. This is where my memory is a little shaky. I tried to block it out after that day happened. He was about 16 or 17 at the time. I remember we walked around and looked at taxidermy at the little weird nature museum that was there. He stared at me a lot. I remember when we were walking towards the woods, there was a biking hiking path. He told me I needed to stay with him. He told me I was exactly the kind of girl some guy would want to fuck because I had more cushion for the pushing. I was young, but I knew what he was saying wasn't right. There was something about him and the way that he tried to hold me close to him that scared me. We were probably 30 yards into the trail when I realized I needed to get away from him. I pretended to look at something on the ground and let him get a few feet away from me, then I took off. I ran as fast as I could, even though I could hear him yelling at me and chasing me. When I got back, my mom was close to passing out, but I stayed with her and my aunts. He made up some lame lie because they asked why I came running. He told them that I saw a snake and it scared me. I'm 16 now, and I thought that I was past all of this. Last month, I kept on having recurring nightmares about his face and him chasing me. I told my mom about it for the first time, and she held me while I was having a panic attack. I don't know what would have happened, but no matter what anyone says, I know it wouldn't have been good. So this happened a few months ago. I'm a sophomore in college and was traveling down to my hometown over break. I was having some relationship issues with my stepmom, so I didn't want to stay at my dad's house the night I arrived at my hometown. I phoned a friend of mine from high school and asked if I could stay at his place. I knew from social media that he was still in town, and I've stayed at his place before, so I knew there would be a place for me to stay if they could allow it. My friend, let's call him Zach, seemed like a pretty normal dude. We weren't best friends or anything, but we had gotten pretty close by the time we graduated. We would occasionally text or hang out if I was in town, catch up, reminisce on times we spent in orchestra or in English class. When I called, he seemed extremely enthusiastic. Zach is normally an upbeat guy, but this time it seemed like he was getting a brand new car. I didn't think about it at the time, and he said I could sleep in his guest room, so I headed over. When I got to his house, he was just as excited as he was on the phone. He was bringing up stuff to do like get high and watch weird movies or play video games. Zach's parents weren't home, so he really wanted the opportunity to smoke. I was pretty tired from the drive, but since we rarely see each other, I thought a little bit of bonding couldn't hurt. We'd play Smash Bros, smoked some weed, and just chatted for a few hours. It was longer than I wanted, but I was having fun, so whatever, right? By this time, it was getting late, around 2 a.m., and he started asking me some pretty weird questions. Like if I ever wondered what it would be like to kill someone, or if I thought anyone would miss me if I was gone. This, along with some pretty normal questions like if I had a boyfriend, or how my parents are doing, if I'm making any friends in school. It just gave me a weird feeling. But it didn't hit me until after that Zach could be assessing me for something bad. The weirdness of it all made me just want to go to bed. We stopped the game and both went into the basement where his room and the guest room were. We say goodnight, I go into my room and get ready for bed. I'm having trouble sleeping, just insomnia that I've had for a while. So I stay awake for around an hour until I hear some movement outside my room. The walls were pretty thin, so I could hear his footsteps walking past the door, up the stairs to the main floor, then back down quickly after. What struck me as odd is that I didn't hear the basement door open, which creaks when it does. The lights didn't turn on, so I was confused what Zach was doing. I heard him go back into his room, but I had this odd feeling. Just ever since I met him that night, he seemed a lot different than he's ever been. I decided to look him up on social media and Googled to see if there was anything out of the ordinary. Everything seemed normal, until I found his Tumblr. His Tumblr was very disturbing. There were graphic drawings of mutilated bodies of humans and animals, links to suspicious-looking websites that I didn't dare click, text posts, stories about murdering, cannibalism, necrophilia, and torture. There are photos of guns, knives, and axes, which after looking closely at, were taken from his bedroom. The last post, around a week prior, was a post from the account saying, "I wish that I could find someone easy to kill, like a homeless person." I was immediately filled with dread. I knew that he was going to do something. He must have gone upstairs to lock the door. I packed up my things. Luckily, I packed lightly. I opened the small window to the top of the bedroom wall. I started desperately climbing through it, and as I was pulling my leg through, he opened the door. It was dark, but the streetlights illuminated enough for me to see that he was carrying something. It was long and shiny, so probably a knife. He didn't say anything. I didn't say anything. I just turned around, hopped in my car, and drove off as fast as I could to my dad's house. I immediately blocked him everywhere and reported his Tumblr account, not before telling the police. They said they couldn't do anything as the guns were registered under his dad and he hasn't actually done anything yet. Nevertheless, I told my other high school friends not to hang out with Zach. Ever since then, I've been creeped out whenever I meet new people. Just the fact that I knew someone so well could be a person that wanted to hurt me so bad, who could kill me. I don't know what you're doing now, Zach. I'm not sure I want to know, but I hope you're getting help. Anyways, let's not meet again. I had a very creepy friend. We'll call him Ben. I believe he might be a dangerous psychopath, or at worst, a serial killer. Ben and I met on Facebook in 2014, and he came to meet me in Romania in the summer of 2015. He seemed a bit odd, but otherwise okay. One strange thing about him is that while he was at my house for a week, he didn't bathe for some odd reason, so he stank. Anyways, I show him around Transylvania. We hang out in a few cities before he leaves. Our friendship continues online, and in 2016, I moved back to Canada. In May of that year, I fly over to Vancouver to hang out with him. Now, it's important to know, this guy is a major gun nut. He collects a lot of firearms and claims to have briefly been in the Canadian Army. He also claimed he worked as a mercenary and was in Georgia during the Russian invasion in 2008. He claimed he shot 2 people there and also suffers from PTSD. I get there and his apartment is filthy. I'm talking trash everywhere. 2 cats that made the place stink of cat piss. This guy kept his lights on 24/7, and on his wall was a clock that played a loud tune every hour. His behavior towards me while I was there was somewhat disrespectful, but I just took it as a buddy messing around with me. He said mildly creepy things, but again I brushed it off as him being a prankster. I leave and again our friendship continues online. During this time, his conversations with me become darker and more hostile in a passive-aggressive sort of way. Ben is also a hardcore alcoholic who drinks until he passes out. He does all sorts of antisocial and downright vile things while drunk. Also during this time, 2016-2017 period, he said that 2 men briefly lived with him for a short time. When I pressed him about what happened to those 2 men who had lived with him, he changed the subject quickly. After what happened in 2018, when I last met up with Ben, gave me a strong suspicion something bad might have happened to them. So fast forward to 2018, and me and my parents are driving to Vancouver from Calgary. Perfect time to meet up for a day or 2 with Ben. Big mistake. And we met up at a bar near his house. We have a few drinks and he goes home for the night. The next day we meet up and his behavior towards me is disrespectful in a passive-aggressive way and extremely creepy. And he's very subtly disrespecting me to all his coworkers. He's putting me on the spot and trying to make me look stupid to everyone around. He was a supervisor, so no one was going to say anything. This man is obviously a psychopath. This is where it gets to the point where I believe my life is in danger. We go back to his place. He's drinking a beer and rolling a joint. A movie is playing and Ben is getting tipsy. He's basically now adopted a speech pattern in our conversation where I feel as though I'm being interrogated or toyed with. He's playing a video game on his computer. I'm watching a movie. By this time, I'm feeling very uneasy. My gut instinct is telling me to leave. Generally speaking, you always listen to your gut instinct. That primal thing inside of you that's linked to fight or flight is best to be obeyed. Now, as the day progressed and as Ben was becoming drunk, he starts saying very weird things. He was mumbling about, "I don't care for anyone but myself. I don't give a shit about people." There's a loaded shotgun beside the table. He looks at his computer screen and starts mumbling about being a madman with a gun. A few minutes later, he turns to me and says, "Hey, what if I put some MDMA in your drink?" Followed by, "Haha, I'm just kidding." The cat and mouse game continues. He's now talking about knowing a guy who is HIV positive and how he's going to get that guy to give him an infected needle to inject himself with HIV so he can live off government benefits for the rest of his life. This guy is fucking unhinged. I'm sitting there in disbelief at how vile this guy really is. I want to leave, but I also don't want him to know that I'm ready to go. It's an awful, vulnerable feeling. He has another beer and turns to me. I'm now feeling very uncomfortable. The talk is now about food. He turns and looks at me straight in the face and asks, "So, if it was your last meal, what would you have?" He had a stone-faced look mixed with a little bit of malice. I knew I had to flee. My heart was pounding. I needed to make my move. With adrenaline rushing through my body, I tell Ben in a very calm manner that the weed I had is making me feel funny and I need to get a bit of fresh air. I quickly put on my shoes and leave before he has any chance to stop me. He makes me promise I'll be back. I go downstairs into the sunlight. I feel like an animal that just escaped slaughter. The place I'm staying is not too far from Ben's house. I'm wise enough to not have told him where I'm staying exactly. I start walking, feeling like I just escaped certain death. The phone rings. Ben is asking me where I am and that he's panicking. I tell him I'm taking a breather. Meanwhile, I get to my cousin's house. I somehow manage to get inside. Night has fallen. The guy is calling my phone constantly. When I answer, he's trying to get me to meet up with him and go for a ride. The tone of his voice was flat and fake. He says, "We just had a bad night." He's desperately trying to get me to go for a ride with him. I block his number. I block him on social media. That was the last time I spoke to that scumbag. In my many online conversations over the years, Ben would drop clues here and there about his past. They did horrible things during his supposed gig as a mercenary. He would go on drunken tirades about bad man having done bad things. Deep down, I think he is a psychopath, a potentially dangerous one at that, and I just hope he never murdered anyone, other than the 2 people he allegedly shot while on combat duty. Vancouver is a sketchy place full of missing people. I guess we'll never know.